Hello coders! In today's tutorial, I'm going to be demonstrating how to create a Laravel API from scratch and how to deploy that to a Cloudways DigitalOcean VPS. The first thing we need to do is to get into the terminal to start building this application. From the terminal, you want to change your working directory to the directory that you want your application to be running from. So in my case, I want to do cd into code and then how to code well. The next thing we need to do is create our Laravel application. Type composer, create project, Laravel/Laravel, and then the name of the directory in which we want our application to be within. In this case, we're building a books API, and so I'm calling this application books-app. Press enter, and we should see Composer downloading all of the packages for Laravel. Once Composer has ran, the next thing we need to do is get inside our books application because we want to install the API platform package. So to do that, change the working directory to be the books app, and then from here we need to run composer require API-platform/Laravel. This is going to install the API platform. The API platform has some assets that we need to install. To do that, type php artisan API-platform install. We can now serve our application and view it in a browser. To do that, type php artisan serve. This command will give you the address to run your application from. In my case, it's localhost on port 8001, but in your case, it could be different depending on what ports are currently being used on your system. We're going to copy this and open a browser. And once you've opened that address, you should see the Laravel welcome screen. Now, of course, we've installed the API platform, which means that if we put in /API, we actually see the API platform pages. So type /API at the end of the URL. And here we can see that we have the API platform. Now, there isn't any endpoints in this API yet. We're yet to create them. That is what we're going to do next. You can leave this terminal running if you wish, but the next steps need to be done in a code editor, such as Visual Studio Code, which is what I'm going to be using. Let's get into VS Code. What we need to do is open up the Laravel application that we've just created. Once you've opened up your project, let's take a look at the folder structure. So the first thing to note is that we have the app that holds HTTP models and providers, and we're going to be changing a model or creating a model for our books application in a minute. We also have Bootstrap configuration, database, that is another thing that we're going to be playing with, and we've got root, storage, tests, and then down here we have our composer files, composer.json and composer.log. So what we need to do is create a model for our books application, and we're going to create the model book. To do that, we need to open up a terminal, and to create a model for our books, we type php artisan make :model book, like so. Press enter, and that's going to create a model in app models book.php, which you can see up here. So app models book.php. We now need to create a migration file that will hold the changes for this books model. To do that, in the terminal, type php artisan make :migration create _books_table, like so. Press enter, and that's going to create us a migration file that we can find within database migrations. The file name will be prefixed with a timestamp, so it will be different when you are doing this tutorial. Let's go ahead and change the books model and add some fields such as the ISBN, the title, the description, the author, and the publication date. I'm going to close the terminal, and within this migration file, we need to add some extra fields between the ID and the timestamp. These fields are going to hold the ISBN, the title, the description, the author, and the publication date. Once you've done that, open up the terminal once more and type php artisan migrate to migrate the database. This is now going to create the books table with all of those fields that we've just configured. To make the book model an API resource that can be used by the API platform, we need to do some things to the actual model file itself. So let's open that up. Let's open up book.php. This is the model. The first thing we need to do is add a use statement that uses the API resource from the API platform. Now we've got this use statement, we can use the PHP attribute API resource against the class, like so. If you refresh the browser with /API, you should see that you have the API platform configured for the books endpoint. We actually have 5 endpoints that we can use against the book model. The first 2 here are the same path. However, they have different methods. So API/books and API/books here. One is a get request and one is a post request. We're going to get the books for this one. And then when we post to the books API endpoint, we're going to create a book. We've also got endpoints to return a book by its ID. We can also delete a book by its ID. And we can also update a book by its ID. Let's first try and return all the books on the system, knowing full well that we don't actually have any books yet, but let's see what it returns. If we open up this endpoint and click try out, if you press execute, you'll see this output. This is the curl request that was issued to this URL, and this is the output that was returned. Notice that we have 0 members, the total items are 0. Let's go ahead and create a new book. So open up the post request for API/books. Let's click try it out. We're going to supply the name of the book, that's the title, and we're going to set that as The Lord of the Rings. The ISBN number, we're also going to add the description and the author. Let's also change the publication date as well. Okay, so once we've added all of the data into this payload, we now need to supply this to the endpoint. And if we scroll down here, we can press execute. And below that, we should see our response. So this is the curl request that the API platform supplied. This is the request URL that we used. And down here, we have the responses. So the response body was to return the book back to us. And these are the headers that were returned. And we got the response of 201. The book resource was created. Let's go straight back to the top here and run our get request again to get all of the books back. We should now see that we have our book that we've just created returned to us. So let's open that up and then press execute. And now we should see that we have a response that includes the book that we've just created. With the Laravel API created, we can now deploy this to the Cloudways DigitalOcean VPS. And that is what I'm going to be demonstrating next. From the Cloudways dashboard, click on Add Server. We're going to create a PHP application, and there is a Laravel 10.11.0 application that we could use. However, what I want to do is build this application from the ground up. So we're going to select Custom App underneath PHP here. I'm going to give the application a name and I'm going to call it book-app. We're also going to give the server a name. And in this case, I'm just going to call it demo. And I've already got a project selected, which is book-app here. We now have the option of choosing various different VPS providers, including DigitalOcean, Amazon AWS, Linode, Google, and so forth. What I'm going to do is just use DigitalOcean for this example, and I'm going to set the server size all the way to 1 gigabyte. We're going to scroll down here. I'm going to set my location, which is the closest location to me, which is London. After that, I'm going to click Launch Now. We're now taken to a list of servers on our dashboard, and we can see here that the demo server that we've just created is currently provisioning. We now have the server. What we're going to do is modify the version of PHP. Click on to the server and click into Settings and Packages. Once this loads, click on the Packages tab. At the moment, the server is running PHP 8.1, but I would like to adjust it to PHP 8.3. We can do that by selecting Modify and choosing the option PHP 8.3. You're going to get this warning because obviously we're changing the package on this server. Read the warning. When you're happy with that, click Continue. The Laravel application is going to have its own public directory. This will hold its index.php file. We need to make an adjustment to the web root on this application. To do that, head over to the Applications tab here and click on the book-app. Click on the Application Settings. Here we see the folder name that the application is going to run on, the web root that we are going to install the application into, and other bits and pieces such as folder permissions and the email sender. Before we make any configuration changes here, let's go back to the code because I want to explain why we need to change the web root. This is the Laravel application that we wish to deploy to our Cloudways server. And here we have a public directory. Within public, we have the index.php file. This is the standard index file for Laravel. Our Cloudways server thinks that the web root should be public_HTML, and it will assume that's where the index.php file will be. Now, obviously, that isn't the case because we will eventually have a subfolder within that called public. And to demonstrate this even further, let's SSH onto the VPS. To do this, go back to Cloudways and get the server credentials. To do this, go back to our servers, click on the demo server, and here we can see that we have the public IP, the username and password. Now this is what's going to be used when we SSH onto the VPS. To SSH into our VPS, we need to run the SSH command, passing in the username and then supplying an @ symbol. After the @ symbol, we need to supply the public IP address that was shown. After pressing enter, it's going to ask you for the password. Paste the password, press enter, and you should be in the VPS. This is our home directory, and this directory was shown in Cloudways. Type ls and press enter to see the contents of this directory. And we can see that we have a single directory called applications. If we changed our directory to applications, so type cd applications, press enter, and then type ls to get the contents of the applications directory, we can see this single directory here that has a very peculiar name. Now this is the application name that Cloudways has given. Type cd and then the first character of the application name, press tab and then press enter. Type ls and here we can see the application. We've got a conf directory, a logs directory, a private _HTML directory, a public _HTML directory, an SSL directory, and a temp directory. What we're interested in is the public _HTML directory. Let's change our directory to the public _HTML directory. And inside here, type ls. And there is a single lonely index.php file. This file is going to be replaced by our Laravel application. If you type pwd and press enter, we have the full path from the root of the server to the application path. So we have home, master, application, the random application name, and then we're inside the public _HTML folder. This means that when we deploy our Laravel application, we're also going to have a public directory within the public _HTML directory. And this is why we need to change the web root directory defined in Cloudways to tell Cloudways that actually the index.php file needs to be within a public directory within the public _HTML directory. To do that, let's get back into Cloudways. We're currently in the server settings here, but we need to get into our demo application. Click on Application Settings and edit the web root to be public _HTML/public. Once you've added that, click on the tick. And notice this here is the random application folder that we were just in. We're now going to deploy our application to this VPS server, and we're going to do so via Git. Click on Deployment via Git in the sidebar here. What we're going to do is generate an SSH key that we can supply to GitHub. This is going to be a deployment key, and we can then clone the repository onto our VPS and pull any changes to create a deployment. Click on Generate SSH Keys. Once the key has been created, click on View SSH Keys. What we need to do is copy the SSH key, head over to the GitHub repository and click on Settings. Scroll down and click on Deploy Keys. Next, we need to click on Add Deploy Key. We paste the key within the key text area here and we give it a title. I'm just going to call this Cloudways. We don't need to allow write access for this key because we're not going to be writing to the repository, only pulling new changes down. Click on Add Key. Now I have to add some 2FA credentials. You may have to do the same. Once the key has been added, click back on to Cloudways. Close down this pop-up, and the next thing we need to do is supply the Git remote address. This is going to be the remote address for our GitHub repository. To get that, go back to GitHub, click on Code, and then click the green code button off of the repository. Make sure that the SSH tab is selected and copy the remote address. Go back to Cloudways and paste it into the Git remote address text field here. Once you've done that, click on Authenticate. Once that has been authenticated, we can select the branch in which we want to clone. In this case, we only have the one branch, which is main, so select that. We don't change the deployment path. Don't get this confused with the web root path. This is the path in which we're going to be deploying to. And remember, within this path, there is that public directory, but there's also all of the other directories required by Laravel. Scroll down and click Start Deployment. This is going to kick off the very first deployment for our application. On subsequent deployments, we need to click the pull button. Let's get back into the terminal and have a look around at our application that has now just been deployed to our VPS. From the public_HTML directory, type ls. Here we have a cloned version of our repository. There are a few things that we must do in order to fully deploy and set up this application from within the terminal. This is what we're going to be doing now. The first thing we need to do is deal with our .env file. Type ls-al. Notice that we don't have our .env file. We must first create this or copy this from the .env.example file. For this demonstration, I'm going to copy the .env.example file, but you will need to tweak the values within your .env file to suit your application. To copy this file, type cp, pass the source, which in this case is .env.example, and then supply the destination. In this case, it is going to be the .env file. So this cp command will copy and paste .env.example to .env. Type ls-al again, and notice we now have the .env file. Another file that we do need, but we don't have because it was ignored by Git, is the database file. This is stored in the database directory. If you type ls and then database, press enter, we should see our database file here. If we go to our application on the local site, click on the database directory, we have a database.sql file. Notice it's grayed out. This is because it's ignored by Git via the git ignore file. We need to create this file, and we do so using the touch command. Type touch database/database.sqlite. This is going to create the file if it doesn't exist. Press enter and then type ls database. And here we can see we've created our database file. The next step is to install the packages that are required by this application. What we've done, of course, is clone the repository, but we haven't installed the composer packages that need to go into our vendor directory. To do that, type Composer install. Press enter and we can see that Composer is now installing all of these packages. After those PHP packages have been installed, we need to handle the assets supplied by the API platform. To install the assets, type PHP artisan API-platform : install. And the final thing we need to do is to migrate the database. This is going to create the database tables, including the table that we created for the Books API. To do that, type PHP artisan migrate. We have now fully deployed our Laravel REST API on our Cloudways DigitalOcean VPS. We can now view this application in a browser. We can get the URL for this application in our Cloudways dashboard. From Cloudways, make sure that you're in the application and click on the access details. Here we can see that we have the application URL. Click on the URL and now we are greeted with the Laravel welcome screen. Of course, we're running an API and that is held at /API. And there we have it. This is our Book API created in Laravel, hosted on the Cloudways VPS. So why did I choose Cloudways to host my Laravel API? Well, two reasons. Firstly, I only wanted a very small VPS, and so I just chose 1 GB. Other VPS providers sometimes only provide you with increments of 2 or 4 GB. That's too much for what I need. Also, I wanted to configure the web root as well as the PHP version, and you saw how easy that was with Cloudways. If you would like to use Cloudways to host your next Laravel application, then do consider the discounted link in the show notes below. Happy coding, everyone, and I'll see you again in the next tutorial.